The billionaire vanished off the map. The press said he was dead, but he was alive, sitting on a sidewalk, dirty, disguised, right outside his own company. He wanted to find out which of his employees actually had character, but what he didn't expect was that in the middle of his own con, someone would show up and steal his heart. And now, he was the one being tested. 6 months earlier, on the top floor of a glass tower on the Upper East Side, a 38-year-old man signed contracts worth more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Alexander Harrington had inherited Harrington Group from his father and doubled it twice. He had everything money could buy and still felt empty every night when the office cleared out. "That face again," said a voice behind him. Marcus Bell, his assistant, 15 years at his side. The only person alive who knew the man behind the name. "I don't know who actually cares about me anymore, Marcus. 300 employees, and I couldn't tell you which ones have real character, only which ones fake it well. So what? You're going to fire everyone and start over?" "I'm going to disappear." Marcus blinked. "Come again?" "Fake an accident. Vanish. Walk around as one of them. No suit, no name, nothing. And find out who I am when I've got nothing to offer." "That's insane. What about naming a new CEO? You've been talking about that for months." "Exactly why. I won't find that person in an interview where everyone performs. I'll find them on the street. See who stops to help a man with nothing, without knowing that man could hand them everything one day." The plan happened 3 weeks later. A car accident on a stretch of highway upstate. A burned-out wreck. No body, but enough evidence for the papers to run the story. One of the country's youngest, richest CEOs, presumed dead. Only Marcus and Richard Sterling, his majority partner, knew the truth. And just like that, Alexander Harrington became nobody. He grew out his beard, bought second-hand clothes from a thrift store, let his hands get dirty, his hair get greasy. One October morning, he sat down on the sidewalk right outside his own building. Nobody recognized him. Nobody even looked at him. He learned something in those first few days that 38 years of privilege had never taught him. People rushing to work in the morning don't see the man sitting on the ground. He simply didn't exist to them. His own employees walked past. One of them, his finance director, he recognized the gray suit, almost stepped on him, laughing loudly on a phone call, never once glancing down. A young woman in heels crossed to the other side of the street just to avoid walking near him, not even bothering to hide the disgust on her face. A security guard barked at him to move, said he was scaring off customers at the restaurant next door. Alexander pulled out a small notebook he kept hidden in his jacket and wrote down every name he recognized. There was a woman from legal who every single morning dumped her half-finished coffee right in front of him, like his presence made him part of the trash. And a sales director he knew well from quarterly meetings who once stopped, not to help, but to film him on his phone and post it online with a caption, "This is what happens when you don't try in life." Sitting there unable to defend himself, feeling firsthand what he'd ignored for years from behind a desk, Alexander got it. Dignity has nothing to do with what you have. It's about what you're willing to give when nobody's grading you for it. But not everyone was like that. A young intern just a few months into the job stopped one morning and handed him a coffee he'd bought for himself. "Here, it's cold out," he said, not waiting for a thank you, and kept walking. Alexander wrote that name down too, with a star next to it. Then one afternoon something changed. The door of the small diner across the street swung open. Rosie's, a place with a chalkboard menu and mismatched chairs, and a young woman stepped out, apron stained, hair falling out of its ponytail from the lunch rush. Her name was Evelyn Carter, 29. She'd worked at Rosie's since she was 20, first to pay for community college, then because her family needed her paycheck. That afternoon, for no reason she could name, she walked over to the man on the sidewalk. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Are you hungry?" Alexander, who hadn't been spoken to directly in days, took a second to answer. "You don't have to give me anything." "I know, I'm still gonna." She handed him a small plastic container, still warm. "It's just what was left over from the staff meal. Nothing fancy, but it's good." Alexander looked up at her for the first time, and something right then shifted inside him. "Thank you," he said, in a voice rougher than he remembered his own sounding. "Don't mention it. Take care of yourself." She turned and walked back inside, with no idea she'd just met, without looking for it, the owner of one of the largest companies in the country. That night, wrapped in a thin blanket, Alexander wrote one name in his notebook, Evelyn, and underneath it, one word, different, Over the following days, Evelyn kept coming back. Same time every afternoon, always with something. A full plate sometimes, other times just a coffee and toast. They didn't talk much. The diner was slammed, and her manager didn't tolerate slacking off, but every word they exchanged, Alexander held on to like it mattered more than any deal he'd ever signed. "What's your name?" she asked one day. He hesitated. "You can call me Alex." It wasn't a lie at all, really. It was his actual name, just missing the last name that made people nervous or greedy or both. Nobody had called him plain Alex since before the company took over his whole identity. "I'm Evelyn." "I know," he said without thinking, and she gave him a strange look. "How do you know that?" "Heard someone call you it. From the kitchen." She smiled, accepted it, and went on her way. Alexander sat there thinking about that smile long after she disappeared inside. One afternoon, Marcus showed up in plain clothes, playing the part of a random passerby. "Sir, it's been 2 months. Investors are getting nervous. Richard says he can't keep the story together much longer. Isn't it time to end this?" Alexander didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the diner door. "Not yet." "Why?" Right then, the door opened, and Evelyn stepped out with a container in her hands, scanning the sidewalk for him. Marcus understood immediately. "Oh, come on. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." When Evelyn got close, Marcus dropped a handful of coins into the cup by Alexander's feet, playing the part of a generous stranger. "Have a good one," he said, and walked off fast, not before shooting Alexander a look that said, "This is getting complicated." Evelyn handed over the food, and for the first time, sat down on the curb next to him with a sigh. "Sorry, rough day. You want to talk about it?" She looked at him, surprised that a man in his position would ask her that instead of the other way around. "It's my grandfather. He's sick, really sick, and he asked me for something before." Her voice cracked. "He wants to see me get married. Walk me down the aisle himself. It's the only thing he's ever asked for, and I don't have the money for a wedding that does that justice." My mum used her savings, money she'd been putting aside for years to fix our roof, just to cover the basics. And I feel terrible, because she's sacrificing everything for me, and there's nothing I can do about it. Something tightened in Alexander's chest. "Your grandfather's lucky," he said quietly, "to have a granddaughter who cares that much." She wiped a tear away. "And are you lucky? Do you have someone who cares about you like that?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's been a while since I checked." She studied him for a second, like she was trying to figure out something in his face that didn't quite match the rest of him. "Well, Alex, I gotta get back. Take care." She stood, then turned back one more time. "And thanks for listening. Sometimes that's all a person needs." That night, it rained. Hard. The kind of storm that hits without warning and soaks everything in minutes. Alexander huddled under a closed storefront awning, shivering, when he heard a voice calling from across the street. "Alex, get over here!" It was Evelyn, standing under the loading dock behind the diner, waving him over. He crossed through the rain, and she handed him an old towel. "You can't stay out there, you'll get sick." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the rain hit the tin roof. "You know," she said suddenly, "my boyfriend doesn't get why I bring you food." Something twisted in Alexander's chest, though he couldn't say exactly why. "He says people in your situation can be dangerous, that I could catch something. What do you think?" She looked straight at him. "I think people don't stop being people just because they lost everything. My dad died when I was 8, and for a while after that my mom and I had almost nothing. Someone helped us then. I never forgot that." Alexander went quiet, moved by something he didn't expect to feel that deeply. "Your boyfriend's a lucky man," he said, though the words cost him more than he expected. Evelyn didn't answer right away. "Sometimes it doesn't feel that way." She didn't say more, and he didn't push, but that sentence stuck with him long after the rain stopped. The weeks that followed the storm, something between them shifted, even if neither one said it out loud. Evelyn started spending her breaks at the little park down the block, 2 stone benches, a hot dog cart on the corner, and sat there with him instead of just handing off food and leaving. "You know what I wanted to be as a kid?" she asked one afternoon, splitting a pretzel with him. "A music teacher. My dad played guitar, taught me 3 songs before he died. I still remember all of them. Why didn't you go for it?" "Because when he died, eating came first, and dreaming came later. Later never showed up." "It still can," he said. "Dreams don't expire just because they got delayed." She gave him a sad smile. "You talk like you know something about big dreams." "I used to have them. They felt easier to name back then. Now I'm not even sure which one was mine. So what does a man with nothing dream about now? Alexander took a long moment before answering, having someone ask him that, without wanting anything back. Evelyn went quiet, and for the first time didn't know what to say. She got up, mumbled something about the kitchen needing her, though they both knew that wasn't quite true. Another day, back at his usual spot outside the diner, she brought him something besides food, an old notebook and a pencil. So you can write whatever you want. I noticed you scribble stuff on that torn-up piece of paper you always carry. Figured you could use a real one. Alexander's chest tightened. That little notebook, without her knowing it, held the names of his own employees, some starred, some crossed out in barely contained anger. And now he had a new one, a gift from the one person who treated him like he deserved to own something of his own. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking more than he wanted it to. "It's nothing, really. It's everything to me." That night, on the first page of the new notebook, he wrote a single line. "Today someone reminded me I'm still allowed to want something." His name was Bradley Coleman, 31, an MBA student chasing a director-level job at a major company. And, without knowing it, Alexander discovered that the job Bradley wanted so badly was inside Harrington Group. Bradley dropped Evelyn off at work most mornings, in a car she'd helped pay for. Alexander had figured out from overhearing them talk. "I need the new car for the position I'm about to land," Bradley told her one morning, pecking her cheek goodbye. "Can't show up to meet the board in my old one. You get it, right? Soon as I get promoted, I'll pay you back for everything." "Of course," she said, smiling, though the exhaustion behind it was hard to miss. Alexander listened to these conversations from his spot on the sidewalk, and every time felt an anger build with no way to express it without giving himself away. One day Bradley got out of the car, and spotting Alexander near the diner entrance, curled his lip. "This again?" he said to Evelyn. "I don't get why you keep feeding this guy. He smells. He could be sick. He could be dangerous, Evelyn." "Brad, please. I'm just being honest. People like him chose that life. It's not your job to take care of him." Alexander looked down, not out of shame for himself, but second-hand embarrassment for the man standing in front of him. Evelyn shot him an apologetic look, said nothing, and went inside. That night, Alexander wrote Bradley Coleman's name in his notebook, underlined twice. Not out of spite, just because something in him already knew this man, and he were headed for a collision. He wasn't wrong. One morning, Bradley got out of the car on the phone, not noticing Alexander sitting just a few feet away. "Yeah, babe, almost there. A few more days and this whole thing's over," he said, laughing. "You know you're the one I love. Evelyn's just convenient for now. Once I get the position, I'll handle the engagement. Don't worry about it." He hung up and crossed the street toward Harrington Group, never noticing that the man on the sidewalk had heard every single word. Something clicked into place for Alexander. That afternoon, he called Marcus from a payphone, something he rarely did. "I need you to start a rumor." "What kind of rumor?" "That the director position already has a name on it. That Richard decided while I'm gone to give it to Bradley Coleman." "The finance guy? Why?" "Because I want to see what he does with power before he actually has it. And if he believes it and turns down another offer, or does something reckless, let him hear the official confirmation is a few months out. I just want to see how he reacts." "That's it." Marcus sighed. "Sometimes I think you should have studied psychology instead of business." "Sometimes I think so too." The rumor reached Bradley 2 days later, carefully leaked by Marcus through a contact in HR. That night, Bradley called someone ecstatic, with no idea Alexander was close enough to hear every word. "I got it. Well, basically, they said it's official in a few months, but it's practically mine. We need to celebrate. Dinner tonight. Someplace special." That night, Bradley took his mistress, a woman named Chloe, out to dinner, at Rosie's diner, where Evelyn worked. Alexander felt his blood go cold watching Bradley walk in with another woman on his arm, smiling, without a shred of guilt. Through the window, he watched everything that happened next. Evelyn walked up to take their order, and her professional smile fell apart the second she recognized Bradley with another woman. "Brad? What's going on?" He, far from embarrassed, smiled like he'd won something. "I got the job, Evelyn. I'm the new director at Harrington Group." For a second, she forgot everything else and smiled, genuinely happy for him, reaching to hug him. Bradley stopped her with his hand, pushing her back like she disgusted him. "That means I can't be with you anymore." Evelyn froze. "What do you mean you can't be with me?" "Brad, we get married in 2 weeks." He laughed, a cold, cruel laugh that carried across the whole diner. "Did you actually think I'd marry you? I'm about to run a multi-billion-dollar company. I need someone who matches that, someone elegant, not a waitress. Chloe laughed too and kissed him, right there in front of Evelyn, in front of every customer who'd stopped pretending not to watch. Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. Every dollar she'd saved, every favor she'd done, every humiliation she'd swallowed in silence, came crashing down at once. She turned and ran out of the diner, apron still on, not caring who saw, not caring about anything except getting away from that humiliation. Outside, Alexander, who'd seen and heard everything, got up immediately and went after her. He found her a block away, sitting on the curb, face in her hands, crying without restraint. "Evelyn?" She looked up, and instead of pulling away, let herself be pulled into a hug by the man who, until that moment, was still just a stranger she'd fed out of kindness. "He never loved me," she said between sobs. "He was using me the whole time. I spent every penny I had on him. Bought him the car, paid for his MBA, and now, God, I even let my mom spend her life savings on this wedding. What am I going to tell my grandfather? He's so happy. Thinking he's about to walk me down the aisle." Alexander held her tight, feeling a rage he hadn't felt in years, but also something deeper, the certainty that he couldn't just let her fall apart alone. "Evelyn, listen to me." She looked at him, eyes swollen. "If you want, I'll marry you." She blinked, not understanding. "What? What are you talking about?" "I'll marry you. Your grandfather gets his wedding. Afterward, once it's all over, if you want, you go back to your life, I go back to mine. You don't owe me anything, I just want to help." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for a trace of a joke, and found none. "You'd do that? For me?" "I'd do whatever it takes." She wiped her tears, and for the first time in a long time, something like hope crossed her face. "Alex, you're a good friend, the best one I've had." She had no idea yet how much truth and how much lie was folded into that sentence. That night she invited him back to her apartment to shower, because, she said with a tired smile, if they were going to get married in front of her family, he should at least smell decent. Alexander agreed, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. When he came out of the bathroom, freshly shaved, hair clean, wearing an old t-shirt she'd lent him, Evelyn stared at him from across the small living room, unable to hide her surprise. "Wow," she said, almost without meaning to say it out loud. "What?" "Nothing. It's just, you look different." He smiled, a shyness that didn't match years of running boardrooms. "Good different or bad different?" "Good," she admitted, and immediately looked away, embarrassed. They stood there a moment, too close, and for a second their hands nearly touched, reaching for the same coffee mug on the table. Evelyn pulled her hand back fast. "You should sleep on the couch," she said, her voice pitched a little higher than usual. "We've got the courthouse tomorrow." "Right." Neither of them slept well that night. She lay awake, wondering why her heart raced every time she thought about his smile. He lay on the couch, wondering how and when he'd finally find the moment to tell her the truth. He tried, actually, several times over the next few days. "Evelyn, there's something I need to tell you." But something always interrupted. A call from her mom, a message from the diner, a last-minute crisis with the borrowed wedding dress. And so, without really meaning to, the truth stayed buried a little longer. The next day, they went down to the courthouse to file for the marriage license before the symbolic ceremony planned later, out in Evelyn's hometown. The clerk scanned Alexander's ID into the system without really looking up, typing away, half on autopilot. Then she paused, glancing at the screen. "Harrington?" She squinted at him for half a second. Weird. There was a whole thing on the news a few months back. Some CEO, same last name, died in a car wreck upstate. "You related?" Alexander felt his heart stop. "Common name," he said, keeping his voice flat, already reaching for the pen. She shrugged, already onto the next line of the form. "Guess so. Sign here." He signed. She barely looked up again. They signed the papers, and Evelyn, who hadn't really caught the exchange, smiled once it was done. "That's it," she said, looking at the paper with a mix of relief and sadness. "Once the wedding's over, you're free of me. But seriously, thank you for doing this." Alexander nodded, unable yet to tell her there was nothing he wanted to be free of less. 2 days later, they flew out to Maple Hollow, the small Vermont town where Evelyn's family lived. Maple trees just starting to turn red and gold, a church bell marking the hour, the whole town smelling faintly of wood smoke and someone's apple pie. Her family welcomed him with a warmth Alexander couldn't remember feeling in any boardroom, at any five-star dinner, in his old life. Her mother, Diane, hugged him like she'd known him for years. "So you're the man who's going to make my daughter happy," she said, wiping away a tear. "Welcome to the family." Later, while Evelyn helped set up chairs in the backyard, Diane pulled Alexander aside, blunt in the way of someone who no longer had time for half-truths. "I spent every dime I had saved for this wedding," she told him, looking him dead in the eye. "Years putting money aside to fix our leaking roof. Spent it all. No hesitation, because my father asked to see his granddaughter married before he goes." She let that sit for a second. "I don't regret it, but this family doesn't have much more to give. If you're staying, it better be because you actually love my daughter, not because you feel sorry for her." Alexander felt the weight of those words land with an honesty he rarely got anymore. "Ma'am, I promise you what I feel for Evelyn has nothing to do with pity. And about that roof, let me help with that. We don't need charity. It's not charity. It's gratitude. You raised a woman who'll feed a stranger without expecting anything back. That's worth more to me than you know." Diane studied him a long moment, and something in her tired but steady eyes seemed to accept the answer. "Fine. But the day you break her heart, you're gonna answer to me, and trust me, I don't care how big a shot you are." Alexander smiled, genuine respect in it. "Count on it, ma'am." Her grandfather, Walter, frail now, sitting in a wheelchair under a maple tree, took Alexander's hand in his. "Take care of her," he said, voice shaking with age. "That's all I'm asking." "I promise," Alexander answered, and in that moment, without planning it, the promise stopped being part of the act. At dinner, someone asked, laughing, what Alexander did for a living. "He's between jobs right now," Evelyn answered, a little embarrassed. "What a waste," one of the aunts said, laughing. "With that face, he could model." Everyone laughed, Alexander included, and he felt for the first time in months a strange warmth, the feeling of belonging to something, not because of his money or his name, but simply for being himself. The wedding, originally planned as something small at an uncle's farm, changed course when Alexander had Marcus quietly reach out to the family, letting them know they'd been invited to a special event at a venue nearby. The family, surprised, went along, not fully understanding what was happening. Meanwhile, back in the city, dozens of Harrington Group employees received a formal invitation to an important corporate event. No other details, signed only by Richard Sterling. Among them, Bradley Coleman, who showed up with Chloe on his arm, convinced the whole thing was a celebration of his upcoming promotion. The event was held at Ashford Manor, a venue draped in warm lights and white flowers. Evelyn's family arrived dazzled, still with no idea the wedding everyone was buzzing about was actually their own daughter's. Evelyn, brought by Marcus to a private suite at the venue, found herself suddenly face to face with Alexander, dressed sharp, clean-shaven, carrying himself in a way that didn't match the homeless man she'd known months earlier. "Alex, what's going on? Whose wedding is this?" Alexander took a breath. The moment he'd been putting off had finally arrived. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." She nodded, heart racing, bracing for anything. "My whole life I valued a person's character above everything else, above money, power, everything. But at some point, I got tired of not knowing who actually loved me and who just wanted what I had. So I decided to disappear. Faked an accident and became for months the man you knew on that sidewalk." Evelyn stepped back, eyes wide. "I don't understand. I never lied about what I felt for you. That was the one real thing in all of this. But I didn't tell you who I actually was because I was scared. Scared that knowing would change everything between us. Scared of losing the one genuine thing I'd found in years. So who are you?" He took a breath. "My name is Alexander Harrington. I own Harrington Group." The silence that followed felt endless. "You're the CEO from the accident? The one from the news?" "Yes." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, and for a second, Alexander thought she'd walk out, thought she'd feel used the same way Bradley had used her. "So this whole thing, was it an experiment? Was I part of your test?" "No," he said, firm, stepping closer. "You were never part of the test, Evelyn. The test was to find out who could treat someone well with nothing to gain from it. And you did that without knowing the last name attached to me. You fed me without knowing it. You kept me out of the rain without knowing it. You told me your fears, your sadness, your dreams to Alex, not to some name on a building. And everything I felt for you, I felt as Alex too. That part was never a lie. I never even gave you a fake name. I just stopped saying the last name that turns every conversation into a transaction. First time in years someone wanted just Alex." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, caught between the confusion. The pain of once again finding out a truth from someone else's mouth, and something warmer that kept growing anyway. You should have told me sooner. I know. I tried, more than once. And every time I lost my nerve because I was scared of losing you. I'm sorry for that, but I needed you to know the truth before I asked you this. He knelt in front of her and pulled a small box from his pocket. Evelyn Carter, I asked you to marry me to help you, that part's true. But somewhere along the way, without planning it, I fell in love with you like I've never fallen for anyone. Not as Alexander Harrington, business owner. As Alex, a man with nothing, who found in you everything that actually matters. So I'm asking you again, now that you know who I really am, will you marry me? Evelyn looked at the ring, then at him, and finally, through tears, smiled. This whole time I thought I was falling for a man who had nothing to offer me. Turns out he had the most to give of anyone I've ever met. Is that a yes? That's a yes. They kissed, different this time, no shadow of a lie hanging between them. Half an hour later, a small team of stylists finished getting Evelyn ready in a wedding dress that looked pulled straight from a dream, while Alexander got dressed in another room with Marcus, who couldn't stop grinning. Never thought I'd see you this nervous, not even in your biggest board meeting. This is bigger than any board meeting, Marcus. Minutes before walking into the main hall, Marcus stopped him in the hallway, straightening his tie with slightly clumsy hands, nervous himself. You sure about this? He asked. A few hours ago, she didn't even know your last name, and now she's about to marry you in front of her whole family and half your company. That's a lot, Alexander. Even for you. I know. And if later, once she really sits with it, she feels like you used her for your own plan, that the courthouse, the license, all of it was part of a strategy. Alexander looked toward the closed door, behind which, somewhere, Evelyn was getting ready too. That's my biggest fear, Marcus. I've thought about it every night since I decided to tell her the truth, but if I don't give her the chance to choose, with the full picture, with who I really am, then it really would be a lie. I told her. She decided. All I can do now is trust that what we built, even if it started on a sidewalk instead of a boardroom, was real. Marcus nodded, giving him one last pat on the shoulder. For what it's worth, sir, this is the first time in 15 years I've seen you this nervous about something that has nothing to do with numbers. For what it's worth, Marcus, this is the first time in 15 years something's mattered to me more than the numbers. When the doors to the main hall opened and Alexander walked in to take his place at the altar, a murmur rippled through the room. The Harrington Group employees, who'd shown up thinking this was some corporate gathering, went quiet, spotting Richard Sterling grinning from the front row. Then the officiant took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the wedding of Mr. Alexander Harrington. The entire room fell dead silent. Bradley, seated front row next to Chloe, felt his stomach drop. Alexander Harrington? He muttered, confused. But he's supposed to be... He looked toward the front, at the man standing by the altar, and something about that clean-shaven face, that look, struck him as strangely familiar. No, he thought, it can't be. Then the wedding march began, and everyone stood. Evelyn walked in on her grandfather's arm. Walter, frail as he was, walking with a strength that seemed pulled from the last reserves of his heart, tears of joy running down his weathered face. Bradley stared at Evelyn, radiant, beautiful, walking toward the man at the altar. And then he recognized her. That's her, he whispered, stunned, turning back to look at Alexander. That's when the pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. The homeless man from the sidewalk. The man he'd humiliated over and over. The man he'd told he smelled, that he was dangerous, that he didn't deserve any help, was the same man now marrying the woman Bradley had thrown away like she meant nothing. Chloe, beside him, noticed his face go pale. What's wrong with you? Bradley couldn't answer. He just stared at the ceremony, feeling the ground crumble under him piece by piece. The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply moving. Walter, voice shaking, handed his granddaughter's hand to the man he believed had saved her, with no idea how literal that was. After the vows, before they were pronounced husband and wife, Alexander took the microphone for a moment. I want to say something if you'll let me. The room went quiet. A few months ago, I disappeared from my own life, faked an accident, lived on the street for months. No name, no money, nothing. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. I needed to know who'd treat me with respect when I had nothing to offer back. Along the way, I learned some hard things about people I trusted. He paused. And I found the most generous woman I've ever met, someone who fed me without knowing who I was, kept me out of the rain without knowing who I was. She taught me real wealth isn't about what you have. It's what you're willing to give when nobody's keeping score. He looked at Evelyn, eyes full. Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. Applause filled the room, plenty of it through tears, and the ceremony ended with a kiss that finally sealed a story that had started on a cold sidewalk months before. During the reception, Bradley, pulling together courage he didn't know he had, approached Alexander, who was chatting with a few guests near the head table. "Mr. Harrington," he said, voice barely steady, "I wanted to thank you for the director position, despite the mix-up." Alexander looked at him calmly, no trace of resentment but no softness either. "Before you thank me for anything, I think you owe someone else an apology." Bradley swallowed hard and turned to Evelyn, who was walking up on her grandfather's arm. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. For everything I put you through, I was wrong. Dead wrong. You deserved better than me." She looked at him. No hatred, but no rush to forgive him either. "I hope one day you understand the damage you can do to someone when you confuse using them with loving them," Alexander added, calm but firm. "And by the way, Monday morning, HR will have your severance ready." Bradley blinked. "Severance? They told me I got the director position." "There was never a director position. I had my partner spread that rumor specifically to see how you'd act the second you thought you had power. And exactly like I figured, the moment you felt that power in reach, the mask came off completely and you showed exactly who you are. I'd never put someone like that in charge of my company. Honestly, you shouldn't even still be on the payroll. And as of today, that's no longer a problem." Bradley lowered his head, speechless, while Chloe quietly slipped away through the crowd. Weeks later, back in the city, Alexander gathered the entire staff of Harrington Group in the main auditorium. In front of everyone, he told the truth, all of it, and why he'd done it. "I know some of you are going to feel uncomfortable knowing I watched you for months without you knowing. That wasn't to expose anyone. I needed to understand something no resume or interview could ever tell me. Who treats another person with dignity when that person has nothing to offer back?" The auditorium was completely silent. "To everyone who ignored me, insulted me, or looked at me with contempt, I don't hold it against you. People deserve the chance to grow." He paused, letting it land. "But I want this to remind all of us. We never know what someone's really going through, and how we treat people who seem to have nothing says a lot more about us than it does about them." He then announced the promotion of several employees who, without knowing it, had shown genuine kindness again and again. Among them, the young intern who'd handed him a coffee without expecting anything back, now moving up in the systems department. He also announced, with Richard Sterling's backing, that the director position would remain, for now, under joint oversight, while they took the time to properly evaluate who in the company actually earned that trust. At the end of his speech, he looked out into the crowd until he found Evelyn, sitting in the front row, smiling at him with the same eyes that had looked at him months ago, with no idea she was looking at the owner of the entire building, and who'd chosen to see him simply as a human being. A year later, Evelyn was still working, though not as a waitress anymore. With Alexander's support, and mostly through her own hard work, she finished the business degree she'd always wanted, and now proudly ran a foundation the two of them had started, one that gave people experiencing homelessness not just food and shelter, but real job opportunities across different companies. Her grandfather, Walter, got to meet his first great-grandchild before he passed peacefully, surrounded by family, knowing his granddaughter had finally found the real love he'd always wanted for her. And Alexander, the man who once had everything and chose to give it all up to find himself, learned that the greatest fortune of his life was never in the numbers on a bank statement. It was on a rainy afternoon, under the roof of a small diner, when a woman who had no idea who he was decided simply to be good to him. And so, between laughter, stumbles, and more than a few tears, they found exactly what neither one of them expected to find in the last place they were looking: real love. If this story got you, let me know in the comments what hit you the hardest, and rate it 0 to 10. See you in the next one.